What up, though? Ghost University. Today, we're going to talk about the Jesuits and nuns to lesbians. And there was a group called the Human Potential Group. And it's all about human potential, or the ability for the human potential to be whatever it wants to be. Right? So basically, do whatever you want to do, because no one else can define who or what you are besides the self. This came from a documentary called The Century of the Self, because the self will disregard everything else except for what the self wants itself to be. And so, there was some Jesuits. Jesuits are called the Society of Jesus, and there are Jesuit universities all over the world. Georgetown being one of them. And basically, they're going to come with Jesuit themes. And since the Jesuits have already decided that the self is the highest form of understanding, then they're going to let you decide whatever you want to be. And they decided to invade a convent one day. And from there, they let women who were lesbians, or at least women who were willing to not define themselves by anything else besides I wanted to do what I did. So if I'm going to be a lesbian, then I'm going to be a lesbian. And who's going to judge me for that? And so let's see what happens when these women who came from the Society of Jesus, this is a experiment conducted by the Society of Jesus. Let's see what the other nuns decide to do.
So the human potential movement turned to another social group who they believed would benefit from personal transformation. Nuns. And this time they were more successful. The Convent of the Immaculate Heart in Los Angeles was one of the largest seminaries in America. A group of radical psychotherapists approached the convent. They wanted to try out their techniques for personal liberation on individuals whose identities were defined by a series of external rules which they had deeply internalized. The convent, anxious to appear modern, agreed to the experiment.
And we did weekend encounter workshops for several hundred Immaculate Heart nuns. Nuns who were reserved, and they tended to be more reserved than other normal people, were told, don't be so reserved, let it all out. You're a good person. You can afford to be who you really are. You don't need to play the role of a nun. You don't need to keep downcast eyes. And prudence is an oversold virtue.
So let's get this straight. They had some psychotherapists who are about analyzing the self and your ideas and things about yourself, and then seeing where that leads to. And what exactly does that mean? So they wanted to go to the nuns to see how far the nuns would let things go if they were only willing to just let things go that far, and then say, well, you like that. Isn't that really who you are? Well, here's the problem. And it's like I said in my last video, one of my last couple videos, when I talked about Yuval Harari. And is the self the highest form of understanding? Because according to what they're saying, if you just be who you want to be, then nobody should really judge you for that. But the problem is what if somebody wants to be a murderer? Or what if somebody wants to occasionally, let's say, poison a couple people? Maybe they don't die, but they at least get sick. And that's just because that's whatever the heck they wanted to do. We need to find a spot to draw the line about when you're harming yourself and when you're harming others. Because remember, the convent wanted to appear modern. That means we're up with the times and how things have changed. And they're not The things that God ordered people to do aren't perpetual. We're modern, and as long as we're not hurting anyone, then why shouldn't we be allowed to do whatever we want to do? Because this feels good and this feels like who I am, and why should I hide? It's not about hiding. It's about doing what's right. But like the one guy said in the earlier part of the video, he said, we're not about telling you what's right or wrong. We're not here to do that. We just want to be free to find ourselves. Well, what if you, yourself, is leading yourself down the wrong path? The only person who can tell you that now is yourself. Well, at what point do you do that?
You're trying to assert yourself, trying to find out who you are, who you're becoming. At the same time, you're trying to live a life of dedication, of service, and you're trying to make all these things fit into who you are, and you're just, it's such a turmoil at times that you just blow a gasket and do silly, crazy things. Running around the orchard and stealing oranges and taking Cokes out of the refrigerator and crazy things.
I felt like I was being a hypocrite, and I wanted people to respect me for what I was, not for what I was wearing. And so I'm glad for the change.
You feel frightened, but you'll go on.
Oh yeah, I'm scared to death, but it's worth it.
The experiment began to transform the convent. The nuns voted to discard their habits in favour of ordinary clothes. But the psychotherapists found they had awoken other forces.
Solid.
One of the things we unleashed was sexual energy. The kind of thing that the church had been very good at restraining was no longer to be restrained. One sister who was a member of the community, she got the idea that she could be freer than she had been before, and she seduced one of her classmates and then seduced the mistress of novices, who was an older woman, very reserved, and her program of freeing this older woman was sexual. She drove her to the store, and when they drove back and drove into the garage, she leaned over and gave her a big kiss on the lips. And thereafter, sister, who had perhaps never been kissed before, was ready for more.
The effect of the experiment on the convent was cataclysmic. Within a year, 300 nuns, more than half the convent, petitioned the Vatican to be released from their vows. And 6 months later, the convent closed its doors. All that was left was a small group of nuns, but they had become radical lesbian nuns. The rest gave up the religious life.
They gave up being nuns.
They did, yeah, they became persons.
I try to make videos that connect with each other. And just as I showed the video from Yuval Harari that talked about the self, and the self being the highest form of understanding, I brought in the idea of what does the self really know when it comes to your sexual lifestyle. Just because you liked it or it felt good, does that make it right? Does it make it godly even? Because I believe they said at some point that they became like lesbian nuns. Is there really a such thing? I'm not so sure. Not sure. In fact, I can go all the way out and say, according to the eyes of the Lord, there is no such thing as a lesbian nun. All right? A nun meaning you're on God's side. All right? If you're a nun and you're a lesbian, you're probably not on the side of the Lord. At least not as far as your sexual aspect is concerned. But the last thing I wanted to show was that Katy Perry wanted to get involved in the purchasing of the convent. Why? Because we all know that she kissed a girl and she liked it. Word. Until next time, Ghost University, y'all be safe.